they usually say that now we need to take Drushkovka, Konstantinovka, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and the rest of the Donetsk region. So it at least looks decent. So it can be presented as a victory. But under current conditions, that is impossible.
The operations to disrupt logistics that they have now begun fully aligns with the long-term interests of a breakthrough to the south toward Crimea.
Wow, what a big fat lying Ukrainian propagandist. Those are the words that would be told to me if what you just heard would be coming out of my mouth. Because you would say, ain't no way this is true. You're really going over the top now, Georgie. But reality is, Russians very much understand that they are screwed. And today I'm finally making the video that I really wanted to make for a while, where we're gonna dive into what the Russian propagandists are telling about situation at the front line. And it's gonna be very interesting to compare to recent Putin statements that Ukraine is about to collapse. Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Let's get straight into it. German Sadulayev is saying, very worrying news. Certain sections of the highway to Crimea, our land corridor, is under drone attack by Ukrainian forces. So far, the drones are flying along the road and striking fuel tankers. And overall, the road has become unsafe. This is very bad. This road is very important for us, both for the military and for civilians. Crimea cannot hang by a single thread, the Kerch Bridge alone. When this road was opened, things immediately became better and easier. Both cargo and people began traveling to Crimea over land. I often traveled along this road to Mariupol, to Genichesk, and I was always glad that the special military operation gave us a land route to Crimea. And they built this road quickly and built a good one. It had been completely safe, and now it no longer is. Spetsnaz Archangel. The problem is broader than just the land corridor to Crimea. Damage to our logistics to an operational depth of up to 200 kilometers is creating problems not only for supplying Crimea with fuel. Ukrainian UAV activity over the roads of long-suffering Donbass is problem no less severe, although less visible in the media. That is understandable. People do not travel to Donetsk for summer holidays. At the same time, the focus should not be only limited to the context of blocking from the air the highway to the peninsula through Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Logistics in frontline Donbass are also under attack. The fuel situation there is difficult as well. And it is no secret to anyone, including the enemy, that our military often refuels at the public gas stations for various reasons. Hence the strikes on gas stations Horlivka and other populated areas. Beyond the fuel issue, military logistics also include personnel rotations, the delivery of ammunition, and the transport of wounded personnel and damaged military equipment to the rear and back. Extrapolating from the direct combat zone, when rotation at forward positions has become extremely dangerous, one can expect the enemy to try to increase the number of UAVs in the sky in order to isolate the entire theater of operations. For now, they do not have enough drones of this type, even for, say, the Berdyansk direction, but the likely direction of events is clear. Veterans note, Crimea is facing a fuel collapse, not because Russia has run out of gasoline, but because the enemy has taken out the fuel storage infrastructure. In other words, we still have the ability to bring fuel onto the peninsula, but there is simply nowhere to store it. In all of the enemy's actions related to strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, a clear, systematic pattern is visible, and the pace of such strikes is only increasing. In such conditions, the only way forward is to put as much infrastructure like this underground. I am not completely sure what he thinks about storing infrastructure underground. How would you take big old oil tanks and just move them underground? I mean, some of them are insanely massive. Ghost of Novorossiya is writing, the paradox of the current reality is that the front is moving forward far more slowly than the enemy is expanding and deepening the zone of active controlled UAV strikes onto our rears. For example, those districts of Donetsk and the Donetsk People's Republic that were considered relatively safe have not actually been so safe for several months now. Over the past month, the enemy has been working very heavily and again in controlled manner against a number of targets: thermal power plants, depots, fuel storage facilities, and so on. The issue is not only that de facto places like Kievsky district in Donetsk are already being hit more often than they were in 2024. The point is that there is now controlled strike coverage throughout the full depth of Donetsk and Makivka, with constant strikes on Mariupol highway and so on. And these are not Western-made cruise missiles, but UAVs using various types of radio and satellite guidance. They are much cheaper and easier to produce, which means they will be mass-produced. In my view, if this trend continues within coming months, the situation may become close to critical, especially regarding force deployments and logistics. These trends have been obvious since the end of last year. Yet again, in my subjective view, this problem is not being addressed even at the level of a solution or even planning a solution. And it is not even at the level of being properly recognized. This is going to be a very difficult year. You don't say, Russian, you don't say. Why don't you then get the hell out of Ukraine and then the war is over? Piotr Lundstrom is writing, the situation on the front is worsening. The military situation in the depth is deteriorating. The overland corridor to Crimea is beginning to be cut. Soon they may start striking civilians and moving there might be halted. What kind of asymmetric actions will they take, I wonder? Poor people, poor residents of Donetsk and other frontline cities. I'm sorry that we haven't moved the front, a long-standing issue, by the way. Yeah, I wonder if there is any reasons for that. But I guess that's like too much to ask from a Russian to put two and two together here. Anyway, that the rate of buildup of long-range strike assets and their strike radius continues to grow. Do we have any options? We can't offer nuclear weapons. These drones won't destroy us, and no one else will use them. But if they do, I say what is obvious. The trends for us are not just catastrophic. They are already very clear and well-defined. Very, I repeat, well-defined. One person I personally respect said, if you look at our military bloggers, it seems we've already lost. And I mean, we're reading it right now, so you can judge whether or not this person that he's referencing was right or not. Comrade Artyom is writing, beyond destroying transport on the road of life to Crimea, the enemy continues to systematically take out Russia's energy infrastructure. Every day there are strikes on oil refineries, transit facilities, pumping stations, and so on. What is the response of these old political puppeteers to this? That's right, none. They do not even express concern. They simply swallow it. Military informant. Ukraine is expanding its strikes on Russian logistics. Kamikaze drones, which the enemy had previously used to strike targets in Crimea and Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, have now joined these attacks. In Berdyansk, Mariupol, and smaller settlements in the new territories, fuel problems are already being observed. And active Ukrainian strikes on transport along the roads of the land corridor have only been going for about a month. Incidentally, Ukraine's defense minister has confirmed that there are plans to disrupt Russian military logistics in order to deprive the Russian army of the ability to advance. In other words, one should expect that in the coming months, the drone raid will not end. No, wow, how did he get to that conclusion? Therefore, it is quite likely that more and more Ukrainian units will soon join these attacks, including the FP2 drones with warheads weighing about up to 200 kilos, capable of destroying entire truck parking areas and fuel stations in single strike. Another not explicitly stated Ukrainian objective is not only to disrupt the already sluggish further advance of Russian forces, but also to prepare the ground to their own local counterattacks. Again, if I would be just telling you this, you would be questioning whether or not I am too optimistic, but let's continue. Roads 50 to 100 kilometers from the front are vital arteries along which formations are quickly redeployed from one sector to another in the event of an enemy breakthrough. And if their deployment is disrupted by irregular precise strikes, then a Ukrainian offensive could achieve much more substantial results than otherwise could. And simple roadside netting will no longer be enough here. It is necessary to sharply increase the number of fire teams and interceptor teams in this sector, and also to find ways to eliminate enemy operators. By the way, you will see these patterns where they are writing like what needs to be done, but the clear pattern of the Russian military is that these guys tell that things need to be done and then nothing happens. And then they stop talking about it because they are being ordered from the top to tell that everything is fine. Hardblog is writing, Crimea's fuel crisis is an absolutely expected and entirely predictable event. And it is precisely the result of the complete ignoring of the problem of drone attacks on our country. I personally raised this issue as far back as 2 years ago, proving exactly the point that I just made, by the way, that they underscore things and then nothing gets done. When drones were terrorizing only the border regions, but even then, the outlines of where the Ukrainian regime would focus its efforts were already clearly visible. Through drone attacks, the enemy planned to expose and demonstrate the chronic feeble weakness, organizational impotence, and backpassing within the authorities. The fact that the authorities turn away from problems and deliberately squeeze their eyes shut was seen not only by the population but also by the enemy, who quite reasonably concluded that the Russian authorities would not take decisive measures against drones because they do not want to. When breaching a defense, one should always strike at the seam between defending units. That truth is known even to a platoon commander, because that is where there is a thin strip of space for which both troops on the right and troops on the left believe the neighbor is responsible. And in the end, that is where the collapse occurs, where it is exactly the same. The enemy is striking at the seam where there is no one responsible and everyone thinks someone else should solve the problem. It grows and nobody solves it because there is no one to do so. When the same thing happened with terrorism and similar chaos once existed in a sphere as well, even if blatantly, the National Anti-Terrorist Committee eventually appeared. But now, nothing appears. To this day, no one is taking effective measures. In fact, even if such emergency measures were started now, it is already too late. The enemy has achieved its main goal of discrediting the system of power and governance. There is not only absurdity in the army, but also great wisdom. One saying goes, better once on time than twice correctly. Our great managers have never heard it. A pity. Now, as someone aptly put it, you will be choking on dust in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum going over there. How is it? Well, carry on. Don't get distracted by trifles. Andrei Gurylev, actually the Russian State Duma deputy. I read that my colleagues are writing and spoke with comrades about the situation at the front. There is little positive to say. The winter-spring campaign did not deliver the results we had all hoped for. It is now the beginning of summer and the advance has, in essence, stalled. The special military operation has finally turned into an extremely rigid positional deadlock. The main and most frightening reason for this is enemy drones. The enemy has literally flooded the front line and the near rear with UAVs. As a result, our assault groups cannot even raise their heads, let alone attack. The moment a fighter leaves cover or a vehicle starts moving, an FPV drone immediately comes on it. Infantry are being picked apart on the approaches and progress is measured in meters and tree lines, for which we are paying an enormous price. If anyone thinks we can win this technological meat grinder with old methods and pretty reports, take off those rose-colored glasses. It will lead nowhere good. The enemy defense industry, fueled by Western technology is churning out UAVs by the millions. They have moved to new frequencies and use machine vision and bypass our standard electronic warfare systems. Meanwhile, while the high offices are still coordinating mass production of the needed frequency range of anti-drone rifles, the enemy manages to change tactics 3 times over. Enough indulging the illusions that we're about to break through. That will not happen until we radically change our approach. They want. The positional deadlock at the front is harbinger of our exhaustion, and if we do not seize it back the initiative in time. I can read these for hours. We barely scratched the surface of this just one topic of Ukrainian strikes against the Russian logistics. There is much more issues that are being talked about in the Russian military. Once again, if you look at my videos and what I'm telling it and compare to what the Russians are telling themselves, you might really even consider that, Georgie, I think actually maybe you're not optimistic enough. And I would be somewhat agreeing with you, because Russians truly feel they are screwed. And they are screwed primarily by drones. And if we're talking drone, the best way to do drones is to support the fundraiser for the armed forces of Ukraine. Join the fundraiser for the Black Raven. We're so close to being 3/4 through to it. Guys, let's help Ukraine win so we finally transition from Russians just crying about themselves, losing and capitulating, to actually doing so. Russians getting out of Ukraine is the only right way forward, and we're making that happen. Slava Ukraini, trust in Ukrainian armed forces. I love you, and I will see you next time.
Hi friends, 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade sincerely thanks the Communities Ukraine Matters and Zigas Paul for providing 100 FPV drones for our unit. Honestly, that's enough FPVs to make Russian vehicles identify as submarines. We are deeply grateful for your support and for the fact that people from all around the world continue to stand with Ukraine. All here from the front line, we feel it every single day. And at this point, every donor is basically becoming a little bit of an FPV pilot too. You donate, we fly. We especially want to thank Ukraine Matters and Zigas Paul for your constant support, previous deliveries of drones, equipment, Starlink terminal, and everything that keeps our crews operating day and night. And honestly, the speed of this delivery surprises even us. FPV drones are fast, but somehow your support reaches us even faster. Thank you for your trust, your consistency, and your belief in Ukraine. Together, we are stronger. Together, we will win. Glory to Ukraine! Героям слава! То мої дрони. Hello friends!